Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Nate Evans. I'm Active Transportation Planner with the Maryland Department of Transportation. I'm the project manager for the Maryland Statewide Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. And tonight we're going to go over the planning process, the plan, and solicit some feedback from everyone that's in attendance tonight. With me, I'm joined by our project management team, who will introduce themselves, starting with Marty Baker.
Hi there, I'm Marty Baker. I'm a Deputy Director of Bicycle Pedestrian Access within the Office of Planning, Capital Programming at the Secretary's Office of MDOT, along with Nate and Francine.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Francine Waters. I'm the Multimodal Transportation Project Specialist for the Office of Planning and Capital Programming at MDOT. Thank you for joining us.
And we are also joined by Caitlin Hoban, who's also managing the project from Kittleson and Associates. First tonight, before we start our presentation, just want to go over a few logistics for the meeting. Tonight's meeting is being recorded. All questions and comments will be part of that recording, and we will post the recording to MDOT's YouTube channel tomorrow morning. For the purpose of the meeting, we'll have microphones and cameras off so that everyone can maximize their screen. Please use the QR code here to interact with us during the presentation. Throughout tonight's presentation, we'll have various slides available that you can interact with on Slido. And after our presentation, which should be about 35 to 40 minutes, we will also have a time for question and answer if anyone has any questions on the project. And with that, to help maximize screens, we'll turn our cameras off, but we'll be back at the end to answer any questions. So with tonight's agenda, we're going to go over where we are with our plan to date. We'll talk about what the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan is and what it does. The plan is updated on a 5-year rotation, so we'll talk about what's been accomplished. And then we'll also talk about our existing conditions, reports, and plan elements that we intend to have. We'll wrap it up by going over some next steps, hearing some of your ideas. And then we'll also be in person at the Howard County Green Fest this Saturday from 10 to 3, giving a very similar presentation, but we'll be available on hand for any additional questions that you might have. And with that, I will hand it off to Marty, who will talk about the bike plan and its history. Marty?
Great. Thank you, Nate, and good evening, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Marty Baker, and I serve as the Deputy Director of Bike and Ped Access within the Secretary's Office at MDOT. And I'd like to thank you all for taking time to share your ideas into this important process. As many of you know, the need to develop and update the Maryland Statewide Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan is mandated in our in state statute under the Transportation Article, Section 2-604. And our division within the Office of Planning and Capital Programming is happy to be helping spearhead this effort to help improve the safety and connectivity of the network. In keeping with statute, the long-range plan is being updated on a 5-year cycle, as Nate mentioned, alongside the broader statewide transportation plan, which is known as the Maryland Transportation Plan. And we encourage you to also participate in that process. Like that plan, it will outline objectives and initiatives to advance the creation of a safer, more equitable, and accessible transportation network, both in the near term and as we look forward toward the year 2050. The current plan, shown here, was issued in 2019, and it has provided a great playbook for us to work from. And Nate and Francine will be describing some of the great progress we've been able to make towards implementation. Next slide. But to set the stage, it's worth reflecting that there have also been some pretty major changes since we last had this conversation. New challenges from both a public health and climate action perspective, but also new opportunities, including new funding programs, new leadership, and new technologies to integrate. So this is an exciting opportunity to take stock and set our path forward. And for context to kick this off, I'd like to quickly remind folks of what became a key mantra in the last plan process, and that is that biking and walking need to be seen as both critical and integral elements of the transportation network. So keep working out there to elevate access to active transportation as part of your transportation programs. But secondly, it's not just a transportation issue. Active transportation for all is a critical issue also for public health, for climate, and of course, community development, but also for land use, revitalization, and affordable housing. So part of our request tonight is for you to help us flesh out the elements of the toolkit listed here to develop the kinds of information and programs, as well as the plans that can help us improve the active transportation access for all, and engage with partners to help deliver on Governor Moore's promise to leave no one behind. And with that, as we turn to the next slide, I'll quickly remind all that goals and objectives are an important first step to set the path moving forward. We'll be circling back to get your input on these at the end of the presentation. But for now, I'll be happy to hand it back to Nate to give you some further detail on efforts to date and to help carry the conversation forward. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Marty. So walking and biking come in all different shapes and sizes across the state, depending on where you're doing it. Within an urban centers where it's walking distances and bike trips are going to be a little bit shorter, it's easier to use a car or not to replace those car trips with a bike trip or with walking. Even in some suburban environments, it can be a little bit easier to get to places on a bike. But as we know, the land uses are a little bit more spread out, so the distances for walking and biking are going to be a little bit more spread out. In rural areas, we see some wide shoulders in some places that for walking and biking, because not all pedestrian trips are by choice. It's always good to have a place to pull off when you have a breakdown of a vehicle or the like. But as we know, walking and biking as benefit communities across Maryland with a lot of the same issues and concerns that Marylanders have across the state. So looking at what we have accomplished over the past 5 years, State Highway is in the process of releasing their pedestrian safety action plan. That should be coming out next month. That's going to target key corridors that are along state highways to improve for pedestrian safety. Also, on the bike front, we've been transitioning to using the bicycle level of traffic stress that I'll get into a little bit later. We've also seen an increase in the amount of state funding going to the Kim Lampier Bikeways program. Originally set at $2 million a year, it's now gone up to $3.8 million a year. And this year we'll have available $4.5 million. State Highway has also been using some pedestrian exposure dashboards that have been created to help identify where not only walking and biking, but also multimodal devices such as e-scooters can be a little bit more dangerous to drive. And that's since been updated with the release of yesterday. The MBA has released their crash exposure dashboard that really reports out all crashes that have occurred. And to kind of help documenting all bike trips, we're looking to fund bicycle counter programs in Montgomery County and Baltimore City to help document all the bike trips, not just those that are appearing in crash stats. So like Marty said earlier, this bicycle and pedestrian master plan is done in conjunction with Maryland's transportation plan. This really does cover the aspects of walking and biking for the state as a whole in that comprehensive plan. But there are also 2 other initiatives going underway. Like I did mention the pedestrian safety action plan, but then also State Highway is conducting the vulnerable roadway user assessment that's required by the federal government to report on our state of crashes for people that are walking, biking, and scooting. This is a screenshot from some of the vulnerable road user data that's been available. Crash data is important in part of our planning process because we see where injuries and fatalities are happening. And a main goal of our plans is to improve the safety by addressing these crashes. And when we see recurring locations, we want to make sure that we address those. But even as the locations might not be specific, we can definitely address the corridors and other aspects that play into how those crashes affect people walking, biking, and scooting. And then next month, we're excited for everyone to see what the next pedestrian safety action plan will have with more specific recommendations. But you can also visit their project website now to look at a lot of the important information and the analysis that's gone into creating such a unique plan. So where we are in the planning process, right now we are in the process of identifying needs. The study kicked off in January with our project management team and looking at taking stock of what's been accomplished with the last plan and looking forward to what we want to do with the next plan. We also initiated some meetings with our technical advisory group, and they helped us also kind of set the course for how the plan will go. So right now we're identifying needs, trying to understand the walking and biking habits of Marylanders. Participating in our public survey really goes a long way with helping that. And then over the coming months, we'll meet with our agency and departmental partners to determine what goals and metrics we want to establish for the coming 5 and 20 years. Take all those recommendations into a draft master plan that we'll have available later on this fall. And then it'll be looking to have a plan adopted and completed in January of 2024, along with the Maryland Transportation Plan. So the technical advisory group that I had mentioned is a collaboration of both practitioners and advocates that deal with biking and walking issues. You see a list of agency partners that we have across the state, not only within the Maryland Department of Transportation, but then also at our partner agencies like Natural Resources, Disabilities, and then other regional organizations like the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission and members of Metropolitan Planning Organization staff. We also have members of national, state, and local advocacy organizations that look out for walking, biking, and trail issues. And then we're also coordinating along with our Maryland Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee that meets quarterly. The MBPAC is a committee that's required to meet in statute, and they provide guidance to state agencies on different walking and biking issues. So having MBPAC's feedback along the way has been very, very important. So one of the things that we've been able to do over these past few years is really develop our bicycle geodatabase inventory and a lot of the data that we use behind planning biking for people of all ages and abilities. So one of the ways that we've been able to do that is shift our thinking from looking at how car traffic is impacted by the addition of bicycle facilities. We're now looking at the way how people of varying biking audiences interact and have a different tolerance for different motor vehicle interaction. So looking at studies that have been going on for the past 20 years, we're really seeing these 4 distinct groups of people in the cycling culture. So the first group that we see is the no way, no how. These people are not interested in biking, no matter the conditions or how easy it is. They just either have just no interest in biking, but then they also might have some challenges physically or otherwise that prevent them from biking. There's also another group of people that we see that are interested in biking, but they have a lot of concerns about their safety, whether it's with traffic safety or with their own personal safety when they're biking. But we've been able to see that a lot of these folks that are interested in biking would be able to get out on a bike if the conditions were just right. Like in this picture here, we see with a parking protected cycle track that's separated from moving motor vehicle traffic by a row of parked cars. Similar facilities like shared use paths and rail trails are also kind of facilities that people can get out on bike on, but don't have a lot of interaction with car traffic. The next group we see are the confidence group. They are able to go out and bike in certain conditions and have, a tolerance for biking with traffic, but they do have their limits as well, and so they're not going to get out and bike in all manners and conditions. And then a very small portion of the population is represented by the strong and fearless riders. These are the folks that love to ride out on roads, regardless of traffic conditions. You'll see a lot of folks like this out on weekend mornings or out on an evening ride, such as tonight's beautiful evening. So yeah, those are the folks that are out there riding and really have great tolerance for different traffic conditions and speeds. So we'd like to get an idea of the different cycling audience that's with us tonight. Based on those, based on the groups that we had discussed in the previous slide, what type of cycling audience do you identify with? And again, feel free to jump on the Slido website or use the QR code with your mobile device, and feel free to participate in our poll. Looks like our poll is stabilizing pretty good, and it seems like we have about 3/4 of our audience tonight that is looking at is identifying as being a confident cyclist. We have another third of our group that's interested and concerned, and we have a little bit more strong and fearless joining our audience. That's great. So based on these different types of cycling audience, we were able to identify different types of roadways that are suitable for different users. And so as we're transitioning to the bicycle level of traffic stress, we want to look at roadways in relation to those different cycling audiences. So we were able to do this through a 3-year effort that was based on developing a quality map for both the shared use paths and the on-road bike facilities across the state of Maryland. This was done on both state and local roads so that we could get a comprehensive picture about what the cycling conditions were as a network, not just as state-owned facilities. So we rated the different roadways and paths across the state on a scale of 0 to 5. Working up the scale, the lower the score, the better the conditions. So like a LTS 0 would be a shared use path or a rail trail that's completely separated from motor vehicle traffic. Similarly, an LTS 1 would be something that could be within a roadway, and also a side path running along the roadway. But it could be a bike lane on a low volume roadway. It could be a protected bikeway on a busier roadway, or it could even be a quiet neighborhood street that has very little traffic volume or speeds. As we move up the scale, we get an increase in both the traffic speeds and the traffic volumes, where we get up to an LTS 4, which is represented by a arterial roadway across the state, like US 40, Maryland 202, sections of US 50 on the Eastern Shore. Those speeds where you're getting those roadways where cars are traveling fast, and there's a lot of them. And then we reserve the LTS 5 for roadways that are closed to bicycle traffic, whether by federal or state law or mandate by state highway. These includes roadways such as interstates or limited access freeways across the state that you wouldn't expect to find someone riding their bike. So using those conditions, we were able to map the different bikeable roadways across the state using the LTS score. And so that really does give us a good picture about the state of walking and biking across the state. We were then able to take that data and look at cross-reference it with both census and open source data to identify where it made it easier for folks to reach community assets like grocery stores, healthcare, and the like, to get a better sense for how those bicycle networks really did make it easier for people to get around the state. One of the things that we want to look at for this is when we talk about walking and biking. While Bike to Work Day might be a great event, we really want to recognize that a lot of times it's those trips that are shorter distance that are within our neighborhoods and communities where it's a mile or two, that those are the trips we think that we can really shift from going from a car-based trip to a bike or a walking trip. And so that's where we would like to aim our resources. So when we look at things like a high stress network, looking at one of the questions in the chat since I'm on the topic. Yeah, a high stress network is going to be something like a lot of arterial roadways where you wouldn't find a lot of people biking because of higher speeds and higher volumes, whereas the low stress network is lower traffic speeds, lower volumes, if at all. So getting a good sense for where we were looking at gaps in the low stress network, we were able to do some unique analysis that is going to drive us to help make more data-driven decisions on where we're making those improvements. And also we want to reference some of the latest guidance that we're receiving from the federal government, with both the Federal Highway Administration and with the Federal Transit Agency, that look at different areas of equity need, and then also areas of persistent poverty. It's not always in the urban areas that we're seeing the need for equity, it's also in those rural areas that we're recognizing that there's also that disparity as well. When I talk about the low stress network, the kind of key cornerstone of that low stress network are Maryland shared use paths and trails. And when I talk about a trail that meets the standard of a shared use path, it's going to be generally flat, at least 10 feet wide, wider if possible. But these are the trails like our B&A Trail, the Torrey C. Brown, the C&O Canal, and the Great Allegheny Passage that attract a lot of traffic from people locally and both as tourists. And so these became, it was important for us to map these facilities and get a sense for where they were, so that we could then start identifying those gaps. And over the past 5 years, the Office of Outdoor Recreation was created under the Department of Natural Resources. That's going to help do a more coordinated effort across the state with these shared use paths. In 2009, the Maryland Department of Transportation put together a trail plan that laid out the groundwork for why trails are important and also identified 8 key projects that the state should pursue. We've completed most of them, like the Big Slackwater Gap on the C&O Canal, the Jones Falls Trail through Baltimore City, the Little Paint Branch Trail and the Anacostia River Trail down in Prince George's County. Other trails that were mentioned in the plan are slowly moving forward. The WB&A Trail over the Patuxent River is now under construction. That's going to connect the low stress networks of both Anne Arundel and Prince George's County when complete later on next year. Sections of the BWI Trail up to the Winds Falls Trail are also in design. And then there's also been some creation of the lower Susquehanna Greenway along each sides of the river, but nothing going across the river. So knowing that this last plan was developed almost 15 years ago, we want to get doing the shared use path inventory, help us get a better sense for some of the trail gaps that exist across the state. So now that we're looking at our inventory, you can see where some of those gaps are, primarily between the Jones Falls Trail in Baltimore City and the Torrey C. Brown Trail in Baltimore County. Also, the WB&E Trail towards DC has some gaps that need to be addressed. The trail network between Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County also has some gaps, as well as those in Southern Maryland, like the Three Knots Trail. And then over on the Eastern Shore, the Frederick Douglass Rail Trail has been in development. There's small pockets that are complete, but completing the whole thing extensively would be more comprehensive. There's also gaps on the Kent Island, and then in and around Baltimore City and around DC with the National Capital Trail Network. So with that, I think we have our next poll available. And what trail gap do you think is most important for the state to fill? And then I just have those same list of poll of trails that were listed on the previous slide. Looking at our poll stabilize, it looks like we have all of them as being very popular choice. We'd like to fill all of them, of course, but then also looking down the list, we see that the Jones Falls Trail to Torrey C. Brown is very popular, as is the BWI to WE&A, Three Knots Trail, Baltimore Greenway, all great projects we would like to see completed. Great thing about trails is that they can be used by both bicyclists and pedestrians, which makes a great segue for me to hand it off to Francine Waters to talk about what MDOT has been doing on the pedestrian front. Francine?
Thanks, Nate. That is absolutely wonderful presentation on where we're at with the bicycle infrastructure and where we very well are headed. I'd like to talk a little bit about our pedestrian infrastructure, safety, equity, and health aspects, which was actually born out of the current bicycle pedestrian master plan with the challenge to raise the level of awareness of our pedestrian infrastructure, safety, health, and equity. From that came the Walktober campaign. The Walktober campaign started approximately 3 years ago. It is now in the 4th year. Walktober 2023 has just been given the green light. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the campaign, it runs in the month of, you guessed it, October. And each Thursday there is what we call walk-in-ours. Those are free webinars. During those webinars, we highlight speakers from across the country that speak on specific areas such as infrastructure, safety, health, equity, regarding pedestrians. For we are all pedestrians at one part of our day or another. And raising that level of awareness is so vitally important. As part of our Walktober campaign, we have Walk Maryland Day. So for those of you who may not be aware, walking is the state of Maryland's official exercise. Walk Maryland Day this year will be its 9th year, and it has gained in popularity throughout the 9 years that it's been in existence. We have some great partnerships, including with AARP, a lot of the local jurisdictions with the Parks and Rec groups. And in fact, this past year, we generated a new platform for registering for our walks. So I encourage you all to check it out. I also encourage you to check out our Walktober website. It has pedestrian resources available on it, as well as all the walk-in-hours are recorded on that website. And you can see how we have progressed over the 3 going on 4 years of the campaign. But what has it done? What has it generated? Walktober has generated a pedestrian subcommittee, which is part of the Maryland Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We meet quarterly. We have over 125 people who are members to the committee. It is a very casual group, and I encourage you also to join us. We have speakers generally, and we speak to the various projects and promotions that are happening within the state or around the country. As part of the Walktober campaign, we are partnering with the University of Washington State in their transportation data equity research. Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Harford County are the areas in which the focus is on the collection of sidewalk data. And in fact, next weekend is a mini conference. It's free and it's virtual that's being held by the Data Equity Research Group. And if anyone is interested in registering, it's a great opportunity to understand what is being done in the area of pedestrian, sidewalk, and infrastructure. Also, as part of Walktober, we started a new pedestrian newsletter, Walk This Way. And if you're not receiving it, again, I hope that you'll send an email our way and we'll get you on the list of getting the Walk This Way newsletter. And as I mentioned before, this is all part of Maryland's official exercise, walking, and our interest in making sure that we raise the level of awareness of walking for accessibility, for safety purposes, for infrastructure needs, and for equity. And looking towards the future, we are hoping to produce an inventory of the current sidewalks in and around the state. We're in that process right now. We are hoping to include that in One Maryland, One Centerline. We would very much look to you for support in this effort. The jurisdictions have been great in supplying the information that they have. Eventually, again, with your direction, we'd like to perhaps provide the opportunity for routing itself. And this will help us with planning. It'll help us with community development. It will help us with our efforts for TOD designations as well. The partnerships that have been developed out of the Walktober campaign, I will share with you that we have over 50 partners. That includes not only state and county organizations, but also we have nonprofits and businesses as well as part of our partnerships. So this is we're very excited, and we hope that you will again support this effort and give us guidance on what you'd like to see with our pedestrian as we move forward. So thank you so very much, and if you have any specific questions, please let us know. But Nate?
Thanks, Francine. With the pedestrian inventory data that we have had available, MDOT was able to undertake a study to address pedestrian and bicycle access to rail transit stations. This was an important goal of the 2019 master plan, in that it helped us look at what actually was able on the ground and how people were routing to these transit stations, not just looking at the way the crow flies with a standard half-mile buffer around the station, but actually looking at the sidewalk and the routability and determining if it was a good way to walk. And then we were able to analyze the walk shed and project some recommendations that would help expand that walk shed. So we're on the right track with pedestrian data inventory. If we can get it where our bicycle pedestrian inventory will be, then we will be in really good shape to come back with a lot more data-driven results when the next bike ped master plan is ready in another 5 years. So also in the tone of bike and ped, we also want to make sure that when we update our plan, that we're including considerations for people that are using mobility devices, like e-scooters, e-unicycles, e-skateboards, and also to keep in mind that we still want to be planning for those folks that are using wheelchairs and other pedestrian mobility devices. Across the state, there have been numerous projects that have, micromobility has flourished in different jurisdictions across the state. At the state level, we provide guidance and funding to launch systems like this. But then it's also up to each jurisdiction to determine how each shared mobility program is going to be operated. Most of them have restrictions on vehicle types, where they are parking, if there's equitable distribution required as part of those agreements, and if there's also data sharing requirements recommended. In updating the micromobility practice, MDOT's Maryland Transit Administration has also updated their onboard classifications for allowed facilities. The MTA now allows privately owned e-scooters and e-bikes on rail transit facilities now. So with that, we want to know, have you ever used a dockless vehicle before, whether it's a bike share or an e-scooter? Looking at our poll results, we still have a good portion of our audience that has not tried them yet. Whereas we have about a third saying that they have, and another 23% saying that they've used them once or twice. Looking at the chat and seeing that a comment says that e-scooters are still banned from our roads and sidewalks in Baltimore County. This is actually incorrect. E-scooters are allowed to operate on roadways where bicycles are allowed. They are banned from sidewalks, but that's at a state level. Jurisdictions are allowed to allow e-scooters on sidewalks if they prefer. Baltimore County does not have a shared mobility e-scooter service, but that's actually prohibited. The solicitation of the scooter operations is what's prohibited in Baltimore County. We're also seeing a lot of need for both bike share and walking and biking in facilities down in southern Prince George's County as well, from the chat. So with that being our final poll, we're coming to the end of our presentation tonight. So thanks for your time this evening and hearing what we've been up to and where we'd like to go. Over the coming months, we're going to prepare recommendations. Then we'll come back out to the public in the fall and get your input on the recommendations that we've come up with for walking and biking goals over the next few years. As part of the plan, we're also going to look to include a chapter on implementation and funding. It's great to have a bike ped master plan, but it doesn't do any good if it just sits on the shelf. So we want to make sure that we're following Governor Moore's lead and taking an all-of-government approach to address walking and biking issues in Maryland, especially when it comes to transportation safety. We also want to make sure that we're identifying local, state, and federal funding sources to help implement that plan. While there's been an increase in bikeways funding at the state level, there's also been an increased funding at the federal level for programs such as transportation alternatives and rec trails program that go to support walking and biking infrastructure. But it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of those grant programs are reimbursable, and those funding sources need to be lined up at the local level to begin with. So it's very important to look at all levels of funding with those programs. So at this point, we're going to open up the floor for you folks to give us your idea. Feel free to use the chat and the Slido function where we're seeing some questions come in. Before we do that, we have one more last poll. We'd like to know how you would like to rank the draft goals of the plan. With this on your desktop, you can go and select options from the list and rank them as you would want to. Looking at our poll results from our last poll tonight, looks like safety comes in first, followed by connected networks and local implementation through partnerships, equitable and sustainable communities, analysis, planning, and process, and followed up by climate, sustainability, and resiliency. Thank you, everybody, for participating in our last poll for the evening. Before we wrap up, if you have any other questions, we'll be down at the Howard County Green Fest on this Saturday from 10 to 3. Feel free to drop by if you have any other questions. And then other than that, we'll go to the Slido polls and the chat and take a look at some of the questions that are coming our way. Caitlin, would you like to help us with that?
Yeah, we've had a lot coming in throughout the presentation, and so we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. So the first one, and actually got a few likes, is up at the top, and I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between what's in the Slido poll and what's in the Q&A in the chat. So if you whatever you're most comfortable using, I'll try to bounce back and forth as best I can. But someone pointed out, at least a comment, there's a conflict when trails are managed as rec and park space, but classified as transportation spine, since most parks are officially closed outside of daylight hours. Nate, do you have a response to that at all?
Yeah, we know that that's an issue. We've actually brought that up with Maryland Department of Natural Resources to look at, starting at the state level to see where we can have it so that when some of these trails are being used for transportation, especially in the wintertime when you're getting off of work and it's dark at 4:30, then if you need to ride through a park, you need to ride through a park. So yeah, we do want to look at policies and practices as they relate to 24-hour access through parks. We can certainly address that in our plan.
Just going back and forth between the teams chat, there's also a question about how do you participate in the study? I feel like we went over that a few times, but maybe a good summary of all the different ways that you can participate in the study at this point would be helpful.
Sure, yeah, participating in the study, taking our survey. It's also important to have your friends and neighbors take the survey as well. While we are taking a data-driven approach to our plan, we want to make sure that we're addressing the human needs and putting in recommendations that are going to make a difference in Marylanders' lives on how they can get around more safely walking and biking.
Let's bounce around a little bit. Francine, there's a question here for you. Are there specific state funds to construct sidewalks?
I would turn you all to Safe Routes to Schools that provides some funding for the elementary, I believe also in middle school, funding of sidewalk infrastructure.
And there is also a funding program within the State Highway Administration. It's not a competitive discretionary grant program, but the State Highway Administration has a sidewalk retrofit program where they're talking to local jurisdictions about where it's most critical to implement sidewalk improvements.
Really great. Thank you, Marty and Francine. Question in the chat. How will the Maryland plan embrace local plans such as Walk and Roll and Arundel? Nate, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, for a lot of the local plans, we go to them for infrastructure recommendations. Those are going to be the key things on the counties right away, how we can partner with them on making those projects a reality for them, and then how do they contribute to the state network as a whole. But yeah, using the local plans is the basis for the state plan.
That's great. A question that's getting a lot of likes is ending the use of unprotected bike lanes part of the master plan? They seem to be creating a higher number of near miss car and bike incidents. Nate, do you want to speak to that, especially some of the LTS information you went over?
Sure. Yeah, one of the plan recommendations in the plan is not just to look at unprotected bike lanes, but look at all bike infrastructure. With the development of the context-driven approach that State Highway has taken to recommend facilities and features that are going to be for all roadway users, whether it's increased transit stops, protected bike lanes, wider sidewalks for where we're seeing higher traffic volumes. We want to look at updating the guidance for where those bike lanes are installed and also updating the standards by which they're installed. Maryland's guide for developing bicycle policy and standards hasn't been updated since 2013. So having that be recommended as an update to address all bicycle facilities would be an important part of the plan.
Great. And Francine, this is more about pedestrians. That top question, can we make the norm raised crosswalks so that cars are guests in the pedestrian space instead of the other way around? How are you all thinking about that now?
So very well said about cars being guests in pedestrian space. There are many different treatments that can be used. There are some challenges with the raised crosswalks. depending upon where they are located, excuse me. So I would suggest that we would be looking at all different types of applications for pedestrians, for their safety, but always keep in mind the balancing act to make sure that it is a balanced approach for both pedestrians, automobiles, bicyclists as well. So I would share with you that we will be looking at all types of treatments.
Francine. There's a question in the chat about goals. Will the plan set quantifiable goals for mode shift away from single occupancy vehicles and towards active transportation and transit? Nate, do you want to address that?
Yes, we definitely want to set some goals and metrics for the plan, but then also we've had goals and metrics pressed upon us over these past few years from our state legislators. So we want to make sure that we're meeting the Climate Solutions Now Act goals, a lot of the reporting mechanisms that we have for our attainment report and other state reports. Then with the way that we've been able to develop our LTS data, puts us in a better position to more accurately measure mode shift, and then also to make recommendations for those targets. So whereas safety is important, we want to make sure that we're creating those safe environments so that people can choose to take those trips walking and biking instead of by driving.
Yeah, great. Speaking of mode shift, the place that probably has done it best, there's an interesting question here about partnerships with cycling infrastructure experts, such as Dutch Cycling Embassy and the Cycling Embassy of Denmark. Has MDOT thought about those types of partnerships?
We have. In fact, I just heard that the Dutch Embassy was in town. They were in Annapolis and then went to DC. I think just last week. We do partner with our federal agencies to provide the latest guidance for biking and walking, but we're definitely open to some international experience. But then I would say that with a lot of the way that the Dutch are providing their infrastructure recommendations is also starting to percolate into the way that American systems are being designed, especially at roundabouts, and recognizing the importance of having separated bike facilities.
I would just add, if I may, that I was in conversation with Federal Highways today too, and they have been looking a lot more internationally at examples of how to advance these kinds of agendas. And, you know, again, not to beat a dead horse, but the land use issue is kind of critical. And the way America deals with land use makes it more difficult to just replicate some of the great policy ideas that are out there. But so keep an eye on the land use piece.
Yeah, really good points. And there were a couple questions that were showing up in both. So one is just about the survey and how to get to it. Both Nate and I just posted a link on the chat, and it's also on the website. And in addition, let's see, there's a question in the chat and the poll about how will you prioritize your projects?
So
Nate, do you want to start with that? Yeah.
Certainly can. Sure. So any recommendations for projects that are going to come out of this plan are going to be some of those larger trail projects that our 2009 plan recommended. So we're going to use some of the data that we've developed to kind of help steer us toward those prioritized projects. But we're going to be looking at several different aspects. Not only we're looking at network connectivity, but then we're also going to be looking at what projects are going to make the most difference with addressing equity and communities that have been neglected in the past. We also want to make sure that the projects are recommended are going to be used and do address that mode shift. The advent of kind of what we call big data over the past few years has made it a lot easier for us to as transportation planners to know the travel patterns that people take within and without a community. And so by knowing that, we'll be able to also tie that into how we're going to look at evaluating projects.
Really good. Another question here that might be good for you, Nate. Who would I contact if I had like bike lanes in my community, which is adjacent to a popular shopping center? So it would be great to have you answer that. And then I would just add maybe Francine, if afterwards you could speak to if I'd apply the same question to a sidewalk as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, I was just reading Tim's statement in the chat as well to get a little bit more insight on that. So requesting a sidewalk can be done through state highway, but if they've already marked it or they're not going to mark a crosswalk because demand is low, there's actually new federal guidance that lowers the threshold for requiring crosswalks based on pedestrian volume. And so we can recommend to our partners at State Highway to look at some of the flexibility that might be applied in placing crosswalks and other pedestrian facilities. Tim, if you'd like to reach out, additionally, I can get some better insight on your situation there to provide better guidance to you on that.
Nate, also to the bike lanes and to the question of the sidewalks, it's a question of a jurisdiction as well. So and zoning aspects. So it can at some point be complicated as to who would be the correct organization to approach regarding it.
Exactly. Thank you, Francine.
Very good. Just on continuing on infrastructure, and I will, if I'm skipping over your question, I promise to get back to it. But there was a question about, will updated trail priorities be included in the plan?
That's what we're hoping for. We're still waiting to get some additional direction from our new leadership, but we're confident that we'll be able to include some specific recommendation on trail projects that need to be targeted across the state.
And from all of you as well. Your input as to what projects need to be prioritized is what we're here to ask for. Thanks.
Great. And then there's a question about well, first thanking for hosting this conversation, but then also any updates on the legislation about cyclists using sidewalks with pedestrians having the right of way.
Previous plans have made legislative recommendations for things that need to be changed in Maryland's law to make it better for walking and biking. Those have not eluded us. We know that there are quite a few issues that need to be addressed to make walking and biking not only safer, but then also more equitable. So we can definitely include some of those plans, some legislative recommendations will be included in the plan.
There's also a couple questions here that are a little bit related about, I'll go with the first one at the top about the website, and there's an interactive map. Is this a tool that we can use to make suggestions? Yes, so there's actually this MetroQuest survey, which both Nate and I posted, but then there's also an interactive map on the website that you can drop in geographic specific comments as well. So really great question. There's also an interactive map that has the data that has been looked at to date that Nate went over throughout the meeting. There's also a question about how to give, they're all a little bit interrelated, but how to give feedback beyond this meeting and the polls and the survey. Nate, do you want to talk through how additional public input will be collected?
Sure. So we have both the public survey with the questions and the map survey available for input. We'll have the presentation will be available on YouTube to share. We'll also be at the Green Fest. This is all within the coming weeks, and then we'll wrap up our initial public outreach phase on April 28th when the survey closes. And then also we're giving a presentation at our Maryland Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting. Then over May into June, we'll work with our partners and determine some of the goals and recommendations. And then we will have some more in-person events that go into the summer and the fall. We're hoping to get out to different parts of the state in person to experience what people are interested in and what they would like to have included in the plan. So we'll be ongoing throughout the year. Best way to keep involved is to sign up for our newsletter, and then we'll be giving email updates throughout the course of the year on what the next action plans for the plan is. Did I miss anything on that, Francine or Marty?
No, I
So,
think go ahead, Francine.
so there is also the survey for the Maryland Transportation Plan. I don't know if you'd like me to post that.
Yes, please.
So I have that. Also our our email address, if you want to directly reach us. If you'd share that too. Well, I just can't talk and chew gum at the same time, apparently.
But it's great to see all of this input in the chat, and I'm
find the
reading
chat.
it, and I appreciate it all, and happy to follow up. We're all happy to follow up with you individually to get more detail about your ideas and how we can make the plan the best it can be.
Yeah, and there are some comments about just that it's a lot of what we've described as electronic. Like Nate said, we'll have the pop-up at Greenfest. The second phase of the project will also include a series of pop-ups throughout the state. So some in-person engagement where we're going out to where we know people are to try to engage the community on some of those ideas that are being developed for the plan later this summer. Some really good points and questions. Let's see, Marty, you kind of addressed in the chat, but just want to see, Nate, if there's anything else just about, there's a lot of questions and comments about bike share and bike infrastructure in Southern Prince George's County. Do you want to talk about any of the priorities or activities and initiatives going on there?
Well, it sounds like I need to get down to Southern Prince George's County and find out what's happening and what's needed down there. I've also seen a few questions in the chat related to some of the more physical barriers that we have in the state, like the Chesapeake Bay, Susquehanna River, and the Potomac River. A lot of the crossings there, they're all managed by the Maryland Transportation Authority. That is an independent agency from the Maryland Department of Transportation. But we would like to work with them to help integrate more meaningful infrastructure into their projects so that we can literally bridge those gaps in our state network.
Really great. There's a couple of questions about maybe folks' specific experience with either the Teams chat or the poll. I apologize for any challenges. If there should be also a Q&A button on the Teams chat if you're having issues with the chat itself. Aside from that, I'll also drop the link to our project website, and there is an email you can email questions to, and we will be sure to get back to you. But going along with some of the other questions, there's a question about how will you prioritize your projects? I presumably assume that means how we prioritize them in the plan. Nate, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think I addressed that one when I talked about using our data-driven approach and then also addressing equity access and the like, and then using trip data to help reinforce our results on that.
Great. There was also a question, I might have lost it, but about has MDOT considered 15-minute communities and integrating that into the plan?
Yes, so the bicycle network analysis that we did is very much based on the 15-minute community. With that, we based our trips actually on a 10-minute bike ride and a 30-minute bike ride, so that when we're looking at planning for bicycle facilities, it goes directly to meeting the core goals of those 15-minute communities.
I think going back and forth, I'm just going to double check, but I do think we've at least touched on all the questions. I know there's a couple that were maybe close similar, so they were, if it wasn't directly read, maybe we'll give folks, and there were a lot of great comments, which we are capturing through the Slido, through the chat. So really appreciate that. Maybe we'll give everyone a couple of seconds if they have any last minute questions they want to put in that we can get through.
Caitlin, I see a couple questions I'd like to address.
You do? Yeah, please.
So I see one, will MDOT commit to active transportation or transit projects at the expense of flow of cars? Congestion can make alternatives more appealing. Yes, that's something that the Maryland Department of Transportation State Highway Administration has undertaken on Maryland 187 on Old Georgetown Road down in Bethesda. There, a vehicle lane of traffic was converted to a protected bike lane in both directions, essentially cutting traffic vehicle capacity by a third. Even though travel times increased for people biking, or I'm sorry, increased for people that were driving, there haven't been any fatalities, there haven't been any injury crashes for anybody walking or biking along that corridor. So this just reinforces the fact that MDOT as a whole is placing safety over car convenience. I also see a question that asks, when we're determining accessibility, ADA compliance alone is not a true measure of accessibility. We understand that question, Sandy, and yeah, we know that there is a difference by having that buffer between the sidewalk and that high-speed roadway next to you. It makes a difference to have storefronts to walk next to and a tree canopy, as opposed to walking across a hot parking lot. So we do want to take into consideration all the factors that go into making a place more walkable and bikeable. And it starts with ADA compliance, but it can be so much more than that. Also see other questions about contacting about bike lanes or sidewalks in your community. If you'd like to reach us at bikepedinfo at mdot.maryland.gov, that link email address I placed in the chat, you can feel free to reach out to us at that address with any more specific questions you might have about your community.
Nate, there's also a question here about how can MTA be more involved with bike infrastructure? Maybe you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, so our partners at MTA have been great at putting in biking and pedestrian infrastructure that's needed. The walkshed analysis that we have performed over the past couple of years helps MTA target where they need to do those improvements. And then they can, when those improvements are on local streets, then they can help, again, partner with their local jurisdictions to help get those improvements made.
I think
We're also
Bruce meant
looking-
MDTA.
Oh, then that's a big difference.
Yes, apologies. That's not what I read, but that would
Okay.
also make sense. So like, yeah, if MDTA facilities are a lot of those LTS 5s, and yeah, maybe you can speak to that infrastructure and what coordination can, if any, can happen there.
Yeah, we're coordinating with them actually on a couple projects. A lot of folks might know that even though the Nice Middleton Bridge did not include a separated facility for people walking and biking. The MDTA still wants to gauge public opinion on who's interested in biking over that bridge. So there will be a community meeting on April 26th to gauge that interest. There's also some informational boards available online that would kind of illustrate what that would look like. And then also a public survey to provide your input to the MDTA on how that would, what your experience might look like biking across the bridge. Also talking in sense of different cycling audiences to the agency also kind of helps personalize it and helps them realize that we're not looking to skirt toll fees. We're not looking to make it easier for one select audience to get across the bridge, but we want to be more inclusive to include that infrastructure that's going to make it easier for people of all ages and abilities. And just by thinking in those human scales, it's going to help better make that sale.
There's also a question here about, do you have any near-term goals that we can look forward to? 2040 and 2050 is long-term.
True, it is a long way off, but we want to set up those long-term goals by establishing those short-term goals. Tonight, we spent most of the time going over the accomplishments that we've had in the last 5 years to get us where we are and to help set us up for where we're going to be going in those next few years. With short-term goals, I think some easier ones would be increase in funding. We're also making it easier to help our local jurisdictions get that federal funding, even if the state isn't eligible for it. We're also looking at just the development of this plan will really help be the completion of a short-term goal in helping us set those longer-term goals.
You mentioned funding, Nate. There was also a question about the 3.8 million. Is that the annual funding, or is it the increase in funding that you've seen since the 2019 plan? I believe that's how it was phrased.
So for the Bikeways program, the level started out at $2 million a year for the annual allotment, and then it was increased to $3.8 million. So it was almost doubled in that time.
Right. It's more common, but I think you could speak to just there's a comment about adding, consider creating an officer position to coordinate across agencies between jurisdictions. For example, Virginia's Office of Trails. Does MDOT consider that?
It's something that we've seen Virginia definitely benefit from. Just since their Office of Trails was created, not only did they get an influx of funding to help direct that money to trail construction, but then it's also helped them organize with the way that they do trail implementation. In Maryland,
sorry, go ahead, Nate.
In Maryland, we have a lot of different agencies that do different types of trails, whether it's at the local level, at the state level. Both MDOT and Department of Natural Resources take the lead on some of the main ones. But then there's other agencies that, contribute to those smaller links in their local network. But then having a coordinated office to direct how projects are prioritized and implemented really has put Virginia ahead. So certainly willing to learn more lessons from them and include it in this plan. Marty?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that it's a good point to give a shout out to our metropolitan planning organizations, and the Metropolitan Washington group has been very active, as have the Baltimore folks, and Hagerstown and others, and they are becoming more active and aware and helping us prioritize and think about trail connectivity and bicycle and sidewalk connectivity and data needs. So kudos to our MPOs who are helping us figure all that out and drive that agenda.
Definitely. There's a new question that just came in. What can we do as concerned citizens to partner with you to advance progress on Vision Zero?
We have quite a few avenues that government agencies partner with private citizens to help implement Vision Zero plans. At the state level, not only do we have our MBPAC committee that meets quarterly, but then we also have our pedestrian bicycle emphasis area team that helps to work the state highway safety plan and address walking and biking concerns. Those are two organizations that we have at the state level that you can get involved with to help implement those. There are typically bicycle pedestrian advisory committees and other Vision Zero action plan committees at the local level that are also looking for community involvement to help support those plans.
Great. I'm not seeing any new questions, but we do have time, folks, for maybe one or two more. And Nate, are there any comments that you'd like to address? We've gotten a lot of good comments, so.
We really have. I'm really appreciative for everybody that's jumped on tonight to sacrifice their evening and spend some time with us. We really appreciate your input. We will incorporate as much of it as we can into the plan, and we appreciate your participation. If we didn't get anything tonight that you'd be interested in, feel free to send us an email. We also have the project website up that's available to answer a lot of the questions. And the project website will be updated as the plan progresses. So stay tuned there for additional information as it becomes available. And thank you, Cynthia, for posting those links in the chat to bike ped safety facts that people can learn more about.